Welcome to the 448th episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. Welcome and thanks for listening. I guess we're officially in rainy season here down in Florida, so grass is starting to green up. Humidities, we have a couple days that we have some nicer days, but for the most part, we're still running in high humidity, especially as the long runs go. I am closing in on the Dana 100K race in Texas, and that's the second week of October. So hit the peak mileage week, and now we're backing off. So that's nice. Actually get to go to Cold Creek State Park this Saturday to do a practice run for the long haul 100-mile race that occurs in January. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that park in the loop. It's a 16.9-mile loop in just a little bit north of Lakeland, Florida, which is kind of center of the state, a little bit north, a couple hours from where I live. So it's pretty exciting to go run on trails in Florida. It's going to be flat. I guess there's a couple little inclines, but nevertheless, mileage is mileage and trail is trail as far as different surface. It's supposed to be a pretty flat, easy trail, not a lot of roots. So again, I'll let you know how that goes. And then in between all those things, we have a 50K run back in November, the first week, back in Texas, up towards hill country. So there'll be a little bit more rocks and roots at that point. So just like everything else in life, I've had a few niggles, a little low back irritation, which is kind of new because it's on the left side. Usually my issues are on the right side, or they were on the right side before the race in July. Working with the back program, got things pretty much under control, but an interesting thing happened. So I usually do my, and I've been talking about doing my VO2 max interval sessions on Wednesday. So 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off at 11% or a 6% grade at about a 11:19 pace. So not that fast of running, but a pretty good incline. So I'm huffing and puffing, and I get into my lactic threshold heart rate zone. So I did 7 of those and felt really good afterwards. And Thursday started to have a little bit more irritation on my back, and Friday it would be bad. And then I would rest it and do a bunch of mobility work and planks and, everything I could think of to throw at it, and wake up Saturday morning and I'm better again. And so I'm able to do my long runs. So it happened the first time. I did my long run of 20 and then a 10-mile afterwards. This past weekend, similar thing happened. Thursday started feeling a little bit rough. Friday didn't feel like running much at all. I could go back on the incline like I did before. So I could put the incline up on my treadmill of 15 and walk as fast as I wanted to walk with zero discomfort. But running on the flat was uncomfortable. And then on Saturday morning, cured again, ran 15 miles on Saturday, 10 miles on Sunday, on my feet, did yard work, everything, feeling great. So what's the problem? Is it that my mileage is high, and I threw in the speed work because that's got me before, but it really wasn't speed work, and it's incline work, and I feel pretty good afterwards. Well, it turns out my new dog Threo has something to do with it. And when I when I get on the treadmill and I put a grade up, it kind of takes my pelvis and tilts it more posterior, and the pain goes away. When Threo gets excited when he sees a dog and pulls me forward, it pulls my pelvis forward. So tight muscles and a little pulling from Threo, and I get, back into it's kind of a scary situation for me, because I've put my back out to the point where it's taken me a while to get back, and certainly I don't want to have to take any time off given the race schedule that's coming up. So I decided to do some remedial work with Threo in the meantime, and so we've abandoned running. I've been abandoned running with him. We have gone back to just a training walk close to home without much distraction till we get him down to a nice. Till I get him down so I can communicate with him well, even in the presence of other dogs that are starting to go goofy. when I take Sophie running, and so Sophie runs with me about 3 or 4 miles, and I can say, watch me, leave it, stay, and she's perfectly fine. She ignores the other dog, stays right at the heel. We don't have any problems. But 3-0's not quite there yet, and so when he pulls me forward, it creates an issue. You hate to be one of those dog parents, that has their dog jerking them down the road. And so, I've watched a lot of training videos, gone back over what I've known to do before. Since I'm starting with him a little older, and he probably has some bad habits in him, it's a little bit more difficult than having a puppy to, when I had Sophie as a puppy, I just put a treat at my side and I would walk, and she wanted the treat, so she followed me, and we had a very good communication from the get-go. 3-0 and I are having to develop a good communication. In the house, he's my buddy, he follows me everywhere we go, we have a good communication, but again, he's distracted easily if there's something going on outside. So we've been working on that, and I'm pleased to say that actually we just came back from our second walk today, and he did quite well as far as walking, heeling, stopping, sitting, and all those kind of things. So we'll gradually move our way back up, and I think he'll be a great dog to run with. It just takes him a while since he's so large that I can't have him, pulling my back out of place or pulling me down. So that's where we are as far as that goes. So I think, at first I got a little bit concerned that, oh man, every time I try to increase my mileage and do a little bit of lactate threshold work, I end up getting myself hurt, and I'm going to have to back down. But I think, just watching my body position, whether it's walking 3-0 or running, is very important. So if you suffer from hip or low back or sciatica, look to see your body position, your pelvic position. We do a lot of that in our mobility class, where we assess people's posture and help them kind of get more aligned. So, let our glutes and our abs take the brunt of work instead of our low back. Since a lot of people sit a lot during the day, we drive, we sit, and everything gets shortened up, and we end up losing strength in our glutes if we ever had it, and strength in our abs if we ever had it, and our low back takes it. So most low back pain can be very easily corrected if you pay attention to a few simple things. And unfortunately, there's a lot of low back surgeries done because people are in legitimate pain and they don't know how to get out of it, and they become impatient and they want a quick fix, and they get a surgery. And even more scary is people, are given pain medicines and muscle relaxers, and that has nothing to do with the etiology of the discomfort. It's usually a muscle imbalance. Even if there's scoliosis, that can be, a muscle imbalance to some degree. Trauma, there's lots of people out there that have had significant back trauma that go on to do heavy lifting and running and everything. So even if you've had trauma in the past with your back, or had a disc or had something, it doesn't mean that, you're one of those people that can't ever do anything because you have a bad back. It's how do you get the rest of your body to help you not be so dependent on your low back. And so I think it's real important to look into those things. On that same note, there was a very interesting article that was just published, and it looks at muscle strength. This article was published in Lifestyle Medicine. Strength and multiple types of physical activity predict cognitive function independent of low muscle mass in the NHANES group, and that was a large group people been followed from 1999 to 2002. So they went back and they looked at data from 1,424 adults, 60 years of age, from 1990 and 2000 editions to the 2001 and 2002 editions of the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. And what they found was that it is muscle strength that predicts cognitive ability or cognitive function more so than muscle mass. And, if you think about it, Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'm not saying he has cognitive dysfunction, but if you have a large muscle mass, it doesn't necessarily protect you as good as being Jack LaLanne and being very strong. So think somebody that can do all kinds of acrobats and calisthenics actually do better in the long term from a cognitive functional capacity than people that were very muscular. And when they looked at it a little closer, what they saw was that people that tend to have a large muscle mass tended to have a lot of more visceral fat, which also goes along with more metabolic dysfunction and adult onset diabetes and elevated hemoglobin A1Cs as they get older. So, it's kind of back to that cattle raising theory that, the grass-fed cows, or you might say the deer, do better than the corn-fed big cows as far as because of the marbling in the muscle, the fat in human muscle causes metabolic dysfunction. So I thought that is very interesting, and kind of went on to say that even loss of muscle mass doesn't have as much to do with loss of brain function as loss of strength does. So it is very important for us to maintain our strength. And the good news is that at any age you can become stronger. So you may not put on, you might not look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, back throwing Arnold under the bus again, but if you're strong with the muscle that you have and it's lean muscle, it's going to do you a whole lot of good. So, it goes back to, lifting heavy things, but body weight exercises and mobility, weight training of any kind is going to do one good, and we don't need to worry about, as far as men go, taking testosterone or taking growth hormones to get more muscle mass, because again, you don't become stronger in the same proportion with muscle mass as you would if you're doing your muscle is increasing, your strength is increasing. So I thought that was really very interesting. It also ties into what we do with people that are in the post-operative state. So whether they've had an abdominal surgery or they've had some sort of cardiac surgery, or maybe people have just been sick and lost weight, and they come to us to help them, but they want to be plant-based. And everybody, or maybe somebody has a parent that was sick and they lost a bunch of weight and they've lost muscle mass, so to speak. They've lost strength, actually, and muscle mass. And they want to get that back. Maybe you've broken a hip and you've lost muscle mass, or people tell me they've lost weight and they grab their arms and say, look, I'm flabby. I've lost all this muscle mass. But the reality of it is, and everybody worries about, obviously, then getting enough protein. And they think they need to take protein drinks or eat some sort of, better protein than what they're getting in standard plant-based nutrition. But what often happens is people end up trying to put on weight, and they do that at the expense of adding more fat in their macronutrient ratio. So if you think about it, a great plant-based diet that no added oil and you're making things from scratch is about 10 to 15% protein. And if you want to put on some, you want to increase your weight, and hopefully you want to increase your weight by increasing the muscle, you don't want to increase your fat mass, then if you just eat more calories with the same proportion of 10 to 15% protein, you're going to do just fine. On the other hand, if you say, okay, well, I'm going to throw a lot more nut butters in into the mix, or I'm going to put nuts in, or I'm going to eat more plant-based cheese or more junk food that has added oils, or bars that have soybean oil, all different kinds of oils in them that have, say they're 7 or 8% fat, which turns out to be about 40% of the calories from fat, then you start and you run the risk of starting to put on more fat mass. So you become heavier, but you're not becoming stronger. And that fat mass is ultimately not going to help you in the long term. And especially if you go back to the other article, it's not going to help you with your cognition. So the idea, and so an example would be if you were somebody that was sick and you were eating, let's say you were eating 1,500 calories when you were sick and it's 10% protein, then that would be 150 calories from that 1,500 would be from protein. And if you divide that by 4, that's 37.5 grams of protein. So that's on the lowest side even for a woman. But how about if you bulk that up to 2,000 calories a day, and again, keeping it at 10%, that's 200 calories, and divide that by 4, now you have 50 grams of protein. And I didn't change my macronutrient ratio at all. Now, if someone can't swallow the food for some reason, they're having, GI distress or some other problem, then, we start to look at ways to do liquid calories to get more protein into people. An easy way to do that is to blend up oats in a drink, in a smoothie. And that will get people more calories without adding more fat calories. It's going to keep your macronutrients together. So those are kind of the things that we aim for. People are quick to grab for the nut butters, which also contain, a lot of omega-6s, which are inflammatory, tend to contain saturated fats that can be used to make cholesterol. So those are things that we don't want people to do. And again, processed foods, bars, and things of that nature typically have a higher portion of fat in them than you would like. People are fooled because they look at a package and they say, oh, at the bar is 200 calories and it's only 7, or say it's only 5 or 6, say it's only 6% fat. We have 6%, 6 times 9 calories per gram in fat. So 6 times 9 is 54. So 54 out of that 200 calories would be fat, more than your 10 to 15% that you're looking for. So that's just something on the side there as far as your muscle mass. So bottom line, eat a plant-based diet, 10 to 15% protein, and do strength training if you want to keep your noggin working good. Back in 1987, when I was in medical school, there was a new class of blood pressure medicine coming out called calcium channel blockers. And it was the first new class of blood pressure medicines that had come out in quite some time. And they came out with one called diltiazem and one called nifedipine and one called verapamil. And these calcium channel blockers worked at a cellular level to ultimately cause the blood vessels to dilate and blood pressure lowered. Some of the medication, diltiazem, for example, also worked a little bit on the electrical system of the heart, would actually slow the heart rate down. But the other ones were just potent lower blood pressure lowering medications that worked quite effectively with fairly limited side effects. The biggest side effects were constipation. And of course, as a physician, nobody cares if somebody's constipated, just take a laxative. That's the age-old answer, right? Because everybody's constipated that eats a standard American diet, so just take a little bit more laxative. Occasionally people got a rash, seen some pretty good rashes over the years. And then people would get swelling in their ankles because the blood vessels dilated, become, enlarged, and gravity would cause the veins to leak fluid. And so if the dose was high enough, and the people were eating obviously a salty diet that nobody told them not to, they'd start to have swelling in their ankles. And that could end up being a pretty good problem. Or again, the next step would be to give them a water pill to try to suck the fluid out of their ankles, which never really worked that well. So those were the main class of drugs. And then there was again, we talked about water pills. There are water pills that affect the sodium, potassium in the kidney. And there's a hormonal system in the kidneys called the renin-angiotensin system. And it's basically a set of hormones that nephrologists think the kidneys are smarter than the heart or the brain, but they they send out these hormones to retain salt and water. And so there have been some drugs over the years that have been developed in various aspects or various functions in the kidney to decrease salt retention. And some of the side effects of these were painful, tender breasts, even in men, menstrual irregularities, and potassium. People couldn't get rid of potassium good enough, so if they had any kind of kidney disease, which again a lot of people with hypertension do, or any kind of other problem that would cause them to retain potassium, they could get into trouble with rhythm problems. So that particular class of drugs wasn't used all that much, just in a kind of a limited arena of people. And then there was another class developed called an angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor and an angiotensin receptor blocker. Again, these medications worked at the level of the kidney to alter sodium and potassium and blood flow to the kidneys, ultimately resulting in a blood pressure drop of about 5 to 15 millimeters of mercury. So if your blood pressure is 170 and you drop 5 to 15 millimeters of mercury, that doesn't get you where you're going to 120. So often people are on 2, 3 of these medications, and then a diuretic again to cause people to lose more water, and to deflate the system, so to speak, to get people's blood pressure down. But again, you can imagine that over the years, because we're not dealing with the mechanism that actually causes hypertension, we're just altering some of the hormones in the body, that the disease continued to progress and the blood pressure medicines started not to work as well. And people would assume, and maybe they were told in a lot of instances, that, with the medicine, it just doesn't work as well over time. It's almost like its expiration date came, or your body doesn't respond to it as well as it did. The reality of it is your body's not responding to it because the disease is progressing and it's not potent enough to deal with the problems that you're getting as your blood pressure and the causes of your blood pressure being elevated get worse over the years. So more meds are thrown at people, more combinations are thrown at people, we start to see the side effects of some of these medications add on to the side effects when things are combined, and then side effects that we didn't think, that don't even have to do with the vasculature system, start to occur. And again, over time, people get pretty good at trying to titrate these to minimize the side effect in people. The reality of it is, I think the number is something like 20% of people never fill the prescription after they're given the initial samples. So nobody knows what people are actually taking, and if you're on 6 or 7 or 8 different medications, it's easy to screw it up anyway. So, it's hard to tell. Again, most physicians, they say don't add salt to your food. Well, I think the days of the salt shaker, not that many people use a lot of table salt, but it's in the food. It's in soy sauce. It's in the sauces that people get. It's in the prepared foods. A lot of those different things. So go out to dinner. Again, we've talked about it. People can get, 10, 15 grams of sodium a day when we really want people to get no more than 1,500 milligrams of salt a day. A tablespoon of soy sauce is 700 to 800 milligrams of sodium. So you're almost there. If you just ate fruits and vegetables, it's only 700 to 800 milligrams of sodium. So just eating raw fruits and vegetables, you get all the salt you need. You don't need any extra. But nevertheless, we don't tell people anything about that. If you eat out, it's very, very difficult. One of our patients even, it's like, I didn't realize cheese had so much salt. You think, well, Dr. Dulaney's plant-based people are eating cheese. Well, some of them are. They just are in various stages of believing that dairy is not good for you for a variety of reasons. And cheese is very, very high in salt. Feta cheese is the highest in sodium. Fake cheeses are very high in salt and oil. So if you're eating store-bought products, very high in sodium. It's a preservative. It gives things flavor. so people get into a whole lot of salt. The other thing that happens, even though the classes of drugs haven't really changed that much over the years, the pharmaceutical industry will kind of, change the recipe a little bit and come up with a new medication. And then they come to the doctor's office with the samples or the cards to get so much money off on a prescription. Maybe they'll even give you no copay for a year if you have commercial insurance. And so, they get people on a newfangled ACE inhibitor, newfangled ARB, or newfangled, whatever. That's much more expensive, but you don't have to worry about it, at least for a while, because they're giving you a card, get out of jail card free, that you don't have to pay the copay, so your insurance picks up the rest until you either fall in the donut hole or the card's up and you start having to pay for it. And by that time, if it's working, you're afraid not to come off of it, or your doctor says you can't come off of it, so you're on a newfangled medication unless you're lucky enough to have some side effects that get you back on something else. And the doctor or the pharmaceutical reps come into the office and they, give lunches and they tell people all about why theirs is so much better. And where I'm going with this is that there is a new drug in town, this aldosterone sodium type inhibitor that works at the level of the kidney, and it's called lorundrostat. And it's the next greatest claim because it works a little bit further upstream. So hoping to bypass any of the other side effects of the other one, the gynecomastia and the menstrual difficulties and the other problems. So they did a study looking at, they're on the phase 3 study looking at dosages, phase 2 versus placebo. And, and people that need 3 other medications to control their blood pressure. And kind of what they found was that, they can get someplace between 4 and 14 millimeters of mercury drop in the blood pressure if they add this drug onto the rest of the drugs versus not adding anything onto the drugs. Side effect of retaining potassium is still there. There's also, when they looked at adverse events in a small study, about 200 participants, about 55% had some sort of adverse events, including a decrease in kidney function, increase in potassium, dangerously low sodium levels, perhaps worsening coronary artery disease, kicking up of a cancer. Nobody knew why. It works, dropping the blood pressure. And the dosage seems to be, pretty much honed in. But, again, if you can't get your blood pressure control with adding on 3 or 4 medications, we can add this, and it has some side effects, but, it's better than having high blood pressure. But what they did notice that people who were overweight had significantly more sodium, they retained sodium a whole lot worse. And they noted that, but nobody really addressed it. And they still had the gynecomastia and the menstrual disorders. But, what bothered me is if salt is such a factor, and clearly sodium is a factor as far as driving blood pressure. We decrease the body's ability to retain sodium and the blood pressure drops. Well, why don't we decrease the intake of sodium and get these people metabolically in tune? Again, there's a lot of factors that are being made by adipose or fat cells that cause all kinds of inflammation and vascular changes and thickening of the arteries and growth factors and diabetes and all this other kind of thing. So why don't we address the problem as opposed to put a Band-Aid on people that make things worse? It's so brazen that, even people that are on TV that, you can see they're eating what they want, they're enjoying life. You don't have to change a darn thing. You just take this medication. Of course, nobody listens to, I guess, the paragraphs of side effects at the bottom of the advertisement. Why anybody would ever want to take some of these things. It kind of all comes down to who brought what kind of lunch into the primary care's office. And the nurse practitioners and the PAs are going to dispense this stuff so the doctor doesn't have to see the patient, and they get an attaboy on the back because they control the blood pressure at the expense of all these side effects, because nobody ever really asks or tells them. So eventually the patient may not take the drug, or it's not taking, half the drugs, or in some other crazy order, and, the disease continues to progress. The darling drugs of weight loss, Ozempic and Wegovy and such, just got a slap on the hand this week by the FDA, putting a warning label on them that intestinal blockage can occur, which can be lethal. Interestingly and deceitfully, these two drugs are made by the same manufacturer. So they just slap different names on the same drug, or the very similar drug, and they work by decreasing the motility of the gastrointestinal tract. So the claim to fame is they decrease stomach emptying, you feel full, you eat less, you lose weight. The problem is the mechanism by doing this is a neuropathy that is not going to just affect one organ or one piece of the intestinal tract, but it infects the whole intestinal tract. So not only is there gastric motility issues, but it appears to be that the whole intestine slows down. There was already a warning about increased depression and risk of suicide because, again, it acts essentially. But if we look at the mechanism, it's kind of crazy to think, and what doctor wouldn't think or ignore or choose to ignore, that if you decrease gastric emptying, it's the same side effect that occurs in long-term diabetes when the diabetes destroys the autonomic nervous system to the point where the stomach won't empty, and people then ultimately lose weight, but it's at the expense of neuropathy, both in their legs and their intestinal tract, or in all of their autonomic nervous system. So now this medication does. So not only can you have intestinal blockages because everything lays in your intestines and your stomach, but just think about the microbiome that nobody's even mentioning at this point. You have decaying material because, God forbid, you change what you eat when you have one of these conditions. So whether you're obese or overweight, so you're going to eat the same type of food, and you're going to have select for a gut microbiome that's unhealthy to start with, and now it's going to be overrun by material just laying there, causing more and more inflammation, more and more immune dysfunction, more and more pressure in the intestine, to the point where people become, have megacolon, or can't go to the bathroom at all, or end up with diverticular disease, or even colostomies at the expense of taking a medication so that they won't be hungry, so that they can ultimately lose weight. The only people that are getting free lunches are the healthcare workers and doctors. Ironically, they're getting fed food that is local takeout, which probably requires them to need those medications as well. I go back to the point, if your doctor or your nurse appears unhealthy and their body mass index appears abnormal, then there's something wrong and they can't take care of their own health, and you should question them for that. Rounding out back to my VO2 max training, I've said it before in the podcast, I really don't necessarily like pushing myself to have to breathe hard during my morning runs. I kind of like to go out and watch the sun come up and run and think about things for the podcast and solve the world's problems and be with my dogs. But I know that what I'm training for is going to push my body to limits that I've never pushed it for at the age that I am, and so I need to do these training things that cause me to be uncomfortable. So I've committed to doing the interval training, and that'll be followed by tempo runs. This week I kind of got out of order, so to speak, but I was out on a run and I was somewhat time restrained, so I started pushing the pace, and it's like, well, while I'm out here, I might as well do what's called a tempo run. And a tempo run is a kind of lactate threshold run, so I'm accomplishing the same thing, but in a different kind of way. So I have been going 3 minutes hard, uphill, faster, and then I run very easy for 3 minutes, letting my heart rate come back down. lactate threshold, basically in, cardiovascular terms, you're starting to produce more lactate than your body can actually utilize, and so acid starts to build up in your system and your muscles start to fatigue. And typically that occurs when your heart rate gets over 85 to 90% of your predicted maximum heart rate. So there's ways to go about finding that, and if you've run very long, you can figure it out. There's a couple different ways you can tell where that is. All of a sudden, you can't really talk in full sentences. It's a strain that when you're in that heart rate zone, that you're not going to stay there forever. Your body's going to have to slow down. So when I do a tempo run, that is a longer effort, but not as fast or not as driving my heart rate as high, but for longer periods of time. So you end up kind of the creep effect, creep up heart rate, creep up work. So I did, for instance, 20 minutes of increased pace, and I did 10 minutes, and then I recovered for 5 minutes, and then I did 10 minutes of increased pace, and I recovered for 5 minutes, and I did 5 minutes of increased pace, and then recovered for 5 minutes, and then just, did a cool down, so to speak. And that was after a warm-up run of sorts. So my heart rate would not come all the way down, but then I'd take it back up. So I had a sustained increase in heart rate. And then by doing that, basically your body's allowing you, or you're basically training yourself to be uncomfortable. You're training yourself to tolerate increased heart rate, increased lactic acid production. You're also training your muscles to utilize that acid so that eventually you run faster at a lower heart rate is the ultimate goal. Bottom line is you're uncomfortable. It's a pace that's, if you run 5Ks, 10Ks, it's a pace that you don't want to maintain probably more than an hour, so to speak. So you're glad for the rest part. You're thinking about it while you're doing it. You're just not lollygagging around. So I did that run. So it wasn't a long tempo interval. And so then today I did a shorter VO2 max day because I also had some time restraints as well. So I did kind of a combo this week. So I did 1 day of intervals, 1 day of a tempo run to try to accomplish a similar thing. Both days I was uncomfortable, but in different ways. And that's a lot like changing your nutrition. You've got to learn to be a little uncomfortable. The diet industry would like to tell you that you can eat what you want and you can graze all day and you can have these delicious protein drinks and eat bacon and you'll still lose weight and you never have to be uncomfortable. And it's all a big fat lie. It just doesn't work that way. You have to learn to be a little bit uncomfortable at first until your body resets and realizes it's no big deal not to eat between meals. It's not a big deal to not have, bacon or donuts or something along those lines when you're trying to accomplish a goal and you keep that goal in mind. You're a little uncomfortable at first. You're much more uncomfortable at first than when you first start out. But it's okay. It's okay if your stomach growls. It's feeling that your body is now digested the food and it can go on about doing other things, repair, mending, and so forth. You feel lighter on your feet. You start to appreciate that you feel different. You don't feel bad. You actually feel better, and it's actually a good thing. And then you're able to tolerate a little bit more. And so ultimately, that's how people will get their body mass index down, is that they keep lowering it little by little by little. They keep doing their training little by little to be uncomfortable to the point where they're comfortable being and eating healthy and actually start to enjoy it. You start to enjoy how you feel after intervals. You feel good that you could run faster, you could run, tolerate more. You find out that it's not as bad as you thought it was. It gets easier as you go, and that's exactly the same way as running. It's just hard to talk yourself into being uncomfortable at first. We have this mindset that as we become older, we should become more comfortable, more sedentary, more cushioned, so to speak. But that's not going to do anybody any good. I'll even go as far to say that if you're in a family and you want to become plant-based, they ought to be able to hang with you one day a week. I don't care if they're a carnivore or what they are, they ought to be able to eat plant-based one day a week. Take one for the team, so to speak. I want you to do this with me. I want you to support me for one day of the week. And so that day of the week, you have a cheerleading session. And that day, everybody eats, and then they can do what they want, and you go on about your business. But I think that it's not too much to ask for people that are in your household and you're trying to be healthy. Chances are they need to be more healthy as well, that one day a week, this is how we're going to do it. And I think that's a great way to start with their intervals, so to speak. So plant-based eating intervals, one day a week. It could be breakfast, lunch, but most people can do breakfast and lunch plant-based. So that's being pretty wimpy about it. But you can do breakfast and lunch, and that's not too uncomfortable. It's dinner, it's snack time, it's going out with friends. That's when it's uncomfortable. So do that day, one day a week, and then take note of it. Say how you did, and then do it again, and add more days onto it, or do it differently. Look at different foods that you need to be adding in. Look at more raw. Look at more fruits. Look at a variety of different vegetables. So, start making yourself a little bit nutritionally uncomfortable so that you can progress your diet as well. The other thing that happens, if you have a plant-based meal, chances are the rest of your family aren't going to want the leftovers, so you have leftovers for the next night. So that's one night you don't have to cook for yourself. So it all works out. I think we've been tricked into thinking that we're all going to get high blood pressure and we need to take medications, and there's not a darn thing we can do about it. There very much is. I think we've all been tricked into thinking that we need to be comfortable at all moments of our life, and to not be comfortable is the end of the world. It goes on to people not going outside. They're living captive in their own house, not getting any fresh air, not seeing the sun, not getting any activity. It's like being incarcerated by choice. So for your mentation, choose wisely. Choose to get outside. Choose to get strong. Choose to start getting a little bit uncomfortable. And you'll be surprised just how good you feel and how much confidence that gives you in every aspect of your life, that you can do a little bit more than you think you can. If you want some guidance on any of this, I'd love to help you. Our team is very versed in getting people off their medications and getting people moving, getting niggles sorted out. Hurt myself in a number of ways over the years, so I'm pretty good at sorting these things out. So go on over to our website, drdulaney.com, doctordulaney.com, and find out how you can join the practice. You can email me at Jami, Jami, at drdulaney.com and ask a question. Share this with your friends. Give us a 5-star review. If you like this podcast and you listen regularly, it's been free for 448 episodes. I intended to keep it that way. We might have a few products along the way that we're supporting, but I'm not charging people to listen to this podcast. I just ask that you share it. We're almost to 1 million downloads since I've been doing that. So share this podcast with your friends. Share this with people. The bigger the village is, the stronger that we are. So I really appreciate that. Thank you all for listening as usual. Talk to you again next week.